fascinated me, this concept of a culture dying out. You know, you try to imagine how can such a thing end. And recently I've had a glimpse of how cultures slip away from themselves, and I think it's worth invoking so that it doesn't happen to us. It's hard for us to imagine our culture dying because it's a global culture. I mean, it seems to have unlimited resources that it can call upon. But that's because we live in an incredible bubble of privilege. Well, so I'm, in my own life, think a lot about both historical inevitability and its paradoxical twin, political responsibility. You know, if it's all on automatic, if the world is either undergoing some kind of mass extinction and soul migration into the Elysium realms, then very little has to be done. If, on the other hand, it isn't on automatic, then what is the nature of the political and social world that we should construct for ourselves and our children? And I think for a long, long time, since the end of World War II, basically, we have been living in a future-phobic society where for all of the baubles and technology that has been foisted upon us, no real change has been tolerated. I mean, when you look back to the 1930s, you see that for better or ill, enormous social experiments were underway. The New Deal in the United States and the Third Reich in Germany, which was a 1,000-year plan involving genetic purification of a race, highways from Vladivostok to Paris, so forth and so on. That scale of planning has been banished since, for 60 years, basically. And what we have instead is a future-phobic society that places a great deal of stress on the preservation of a pseudo-tradition called family values by some people. But it has many names. It's not an archaic social model or anything rooted in long-term human organization. It's basically the 19th century industrial model of the couple with some children fitted into an industrial economy. Now I think that the contradictions of these future-phobic attitudes have become unbearable. And so the logjam that has been in place essentially since 1945 is beginning to break up. It came first at the weak point, obviously, which was the Soviet Union. I mean, a system so built on contradiction that, the least breath of reality, and it collapsed. And that spread a lot of joy in the murkier minds of the West, I think, because what was not understood initially was that what this presaged was a crisis in values in our societies. Because the fact is, capitalism and democracy are implacable foes. They can give no quarter. These are two utterly distinct theories of human worth. One which says you are what you own and control, preferably the means of production, and another which says all human beings have equal weight in the political process, and by implication in some metaphysical scheme of values. Well, now these two systems are nakedly exposed in their opposition to each other. The global society is now an integrated unit in the sense that the data that it generates flows into central modeling institutions that then give a picture of it back. But to date, we have not confronted the implications of this in terms of planning. We have been essentially passively contemplating the buildup of an explosive situation very fatalistically. And now we, at least I think, should contemplate the possibility of intervening in our situation. You know, I hear all kinds of fatalism. I hear people saying that our two main problems are population and epidemically transmitted social diseases, and that therefore no problem, you see. But I find that a fairly horrifying way to manage human affairs, simply by an appeal to nature to cut us down, to send the grim reaper among us because we can't manage our own destinies. It seems to me that a whole rethinking of the notion of freedom has to come, and that it isn't strictly a matter of more freedom. One of the things that I think the 20th century has secured but is reluctant to face is the toxic power of imagery. That this is the century of the perfection on a scale previously undreamed of propaganda. And propaganda has to do with the toxicity of images. Now, here at a place like Esalen, we give lip service to the idea that images can heal, but it also means they can hurt. And there are far more hurtful images around than healing images. Now, a social polity coming out of John Locke and the English social philosophers would want to stay away from that in the John Stuart Mill tradition. But I think we're going to have to go back to Plato. Plato did not trust the poets. And the heirs of the poets in our hell bardo are Madison Avenue, because images are being manipulated to the point where democratic institutions become a joke because they are simply referendums of, or rather exhibitions of conditioned behavior.